Hi guys, I'm Whitney and welcome back to my channel. Today, I wanted to go through some unsettling novels that really got me in the mood for the season of Halloween and the beginning of fall. But before we get into this list, I have to admit, I'm not a huge horror fan, so almost all of these novels that I chose were what I call horror adjacent. They were not ones that unsettled me necessarily because they were sort of like jump out scary, but because of other reasons. So let's talk about these something wicked 5 unsettling novels. At number 5, we have Leech by Hiran Ennis. This is a debut novel that just came out this year that I thought would be a perfect novel to get me in the mood for this holiday season. This book follows a doctor in Gothic times who is going to the far north to replace a previous Baron's doctor that has died. As we go along the story, we start to discover that the previous doctor has been murdered and the death is very suspicious. She starts investigating what happened to the previous physician, and we start learning that the story is a lot more than we expected. So this doctor is host to a parasitic being that infects all of the creatures in this particular training system. But they're all like a big hive mind all together. However, because she has this unique perspective, we discover that the death of this previous doctor is even more concerning because it might not have been death at regular human hands. So we have this sci-fi twist to this really interesting murder mystery type story that's very atmospheric. This author spends a lot of time really describing the world, really setting the atmosphere that is very, very foreboding. I did enjoy this novel, but I will say that unfortunately I got a little bored towards the end where there was supposed to be the big reveals and climaxes. I wish this novel had had a little bit more narrative drive to sort of pull me through the story. However, if you're not bothered by a little bit of a slower plot line and you really want to get into some atmospheric foreboding but without a whole lot of horror, this is definitely the book for you. Number 4 is Metro 2033 by Dmitry Glukhovsky. I might be saying that wrong. The atmosphere in this novel is unlike anything I have ever really found afterward. It treats darkness like a character, and you feel it everywhere you go through this novel. This novel follows a main character in a world that has been destroyed by nuclear holocaust, and the entire population left in Russia is living in the Moscow subway system, and they cannot go above ground without risk of death. This boy follows the subway system as he sort of explores all of humanity's vices and coping mechanisms and how they survived living in the subway with almost no resources whatsoever. And of course it goes into religion and politics, philosophy and morality, and then it's all tied up at the end with a climax that really surprises me. I really enjoyed this book. It was great post-apocalyptic, even dystopian vibes. It was awesome. I highly recommend it if you want to feel that unsettled, disturbing feel without a horror novel. Book number 3 is What Moves the Dead by T. Kingfisher. This is actually a novella. Something wicked that also came out this year that really shocked me. It was a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's short story, The Fall of the House of Usher. However, T. Kingfisher took this novella and really fleshed it out. She really explained what was happening with lots of ambiance, lots of description about this rotting, desolate, old chateau of a house where the 2 inhabitants, Roderick and Madeline Usher, are very sickly and dying, and their old childhood friends are going back to try to help them. Things have reached such a level of despair that it's just so obvious in the way that the story is told. It was really a great story. It had a great little ending. If you don't have time to get into something big or epic and you don't want to get into a series, this novel had that disturbing atmosphere that you might be looking for in this season without again being too horror version. Now that brings me to book number 2. We have to get to some of these books beyond just the atmosphere, right? So that's gonna bring us to Blindsight by Peter Watts. Now don't get me wrong, this novel is very atmospheric. It follows some characters who are on a mission to first contact with a new alien species that's been discovered. The first half of the book is atmospheric and foreboding and creepy because we have a space vampire who is the only creature in the universe that can pilot our spacecraft. And that has, of course, been genetically modified humans. But what made it truly unsettling and really something that made you think about it days and weeks after finishing it is the questions that were posed after first contact is made. And this story really has stuck with me for many, many months, and it is something that just unsettles you deep down inside. It asks some questions that definitely leaves you uncomfortable and are questions that you don't really want to consider because they may be right. I don't want to ruin any of these questions because the discovery of those questions are just as important as some of the leftover answers. I really highly recommend Blindsight. It is a very dense novel. It really will make you think for months after you finish reading it. Something wicked this week. And that brings us to the first novel on this list, Tender is the Flesh by Agustina Brazaterka. I'm not exactly sure how to say that either. This is a dystopian novel that is short and pungent, and it's a real gut punch. This book takes place in a world where humans are now reliant on our food sources and our survival on cannibalism, essentially. And this book follows a character who owns a butcher shop and a meat factory, essentially, and he is expected to butcher the humans that have been raised for meat. This novel has absolutely no subtlety. How can I say that any clearer? It is very gory, it is very matter of fact, it is very unsettling in its descriptions of the food and the care of these humans that are meant for meat. And of course, the main character is not a character that we're meant to root for. What makes it number 1 on my list isn't the description of the gore. What made this book so unsettling is that when you're done with the story, a reflection of humanity that is not positive. It tells us and shows us in many ways what humans are actually capable of for survival, for self-delusion. It ranks up there for me with a book like Brave New World or The Jungle. It's kind of a weird combination of those two. I initially rated this book 2 stars because I really just didn't like what this book showed me. And after a week or two, I actually had to go back in my Goodreads account and change my rating because just because I didn't like what this book was showing me didn't mean it didn't do a good job. It definitely took a while for me to simmer on this novel, to really appreciate how much it showed rather than told us how cheap life really is to the human species as a whole and what we are capable of. One of the more interesting aspects of this novel, and another thing that makes it more interesting as a discussion point, is that if you look through the ratings on Goodreads, the people who didn't like this book almost all said things like they couldn't handle the gore or they didn't believe that humanity was this cold-hearted to each other. And I thought that that was something that was a really interesting part of this book because, of course, history has proven in many different ways, including World War II and Nazism and all of those kinds of things, that humanity really can be this crass to each other. So I found it to be an effective novel to bring forth questions that not a lot of people really wanted to ask or want to answer, but things that have to be asked and things that have to be answered. So that does it for my unsettling list. What about yours? Outside of horror, do you have any novels that have really stuck with you and unsettled something deep within you that make you think about it for days, weeks, or even months after you read it? Let me know in the comments down below what book unsettled you the most. In the meantime, give me a like and subscribe, and I'll see you soon.